Okay, so we're going to solve the problem of the day for December 19th. All of these questions are conceptual questions that require you to prove a statement or decide whether it's true or false or categorize it and relate it to the concepts we've discussed in class. They're a lot like the cornucopia questions that you've seen in the review materials that David has posted for each of the midterms and the final. So the first question asks us to categorize the situation discussed in the quote as either involving moral hazard, or involving asymmetric information, and the explanation should include a definition of the relevant concept. So I'm not going to write out a complete answer here, but I will discuss how we can figure out the answer. And let's start by reading the quote. I give high grades in my classes, but then as a result, the kids who enroll are mostly kids looking for an easy A, and no one is interested in my lectures. The guy who taught Gov 1310. So, if we're talking about moral hazard, we're going to be looking for a hidden action, and the action takes place after the transaction. If we're talking about asymmetric information, we're looking for a hidden characteristic. Here we can see that we're dealing with a hidden characteristic. So this is adverse selection. And the hidden characteristic, the HC, is whether the kid is looking for an easy A or not. So the instructor is hoping that people will take the class who are intrinsically interested in the material in this government class. But because he gives out a bunch of easy A's, what he mostly attracts are people with the hidden characteristic of being grade grubbers. So the hidden characteristics interest in easy A's. And then our full answer should include a definition, but you can look up the definitions for these two terms in chapter 22, and that'll give you a precise formal definition, so I won't go over that right here. Our next two questions are true-false questions, and the goal is to provide an explanation for why this statement is true or false. You won't get any credit if you just say true or false, and you get it correct, but the explanation's wrong. So here the claim is that if the marginal cost increases, a single price monopolist will always raise its price. So let's assume that marginal cost is upward sloping, and we'll write that down in our explanation. So we'll draw in our marginal cost curve. And when the monopolist decides on its price by choosing a quantity here, Q star, where MR equals MC, and then they pick the price by going up to the demand curve here and picking P star. So now we're asked to think about if we had an increased marginal cost, so here, MC prime, what's going to happen to the price the monopolist chooses? Well, we can see the new Q is here, Q star star, and the associated price is higher, P star star. So this is true, and the proof is in the graph. So we can draw this graph, which illustrates our point, why it's true. But if you want full credit on this question, you'd have to explain your graph, explain how this Q star is the initial point, and this Q star star is the final choice, the new choice of quantity, and this P star star and P star are the new and old prices, and try to explain why it increased. So you don't just want to draw a graph for this question, you want to annotate or explain your graph as well. The next one asks us if this is true or false. The claim is that if the price of a good decreases and it's inferior, then the consumer will always buy more. Naturally, we're going to analyze this so we'll call this the good, with an income effect and our substitution effect table. So we'll have a substitution effect, income effect, and total effect. Whether the consumer buys more or less of the good depends on the total effect. So our goal is to find whether this is an up or down arrow. The claim is that they're going to buy more, so the claim is that we're going to see an up arrow. If the price of the good decreases, then we know the substitution effect will be positive. They're going to substitute towards buying that good because the relative price decreased. And we know that the income increased, and this is an inferior good. So since we have more income and it's inferior, we're going to buy less, so that's the income effect is down. So this total effect is really ambiguous. Whereas the claim is that it's always going to be positive. So this is false, and we've proved that with our table. Now we just have to explain, write out an explanation of how we arrived at the conclusion in this table for full credit. The final question asks us to prove a statement that a binding import quota will reduce consumer surplus and increase producer surplus relative to free trade. A graph is probably necessary. And then we can assume supply slopes up and demand slopes down. So let's go ahead and draw a graph with increasing supply and downward sloping demand. It said a graph is probably necessary, and as you've hopefully realized in the class at this point, you pretty much always want to draw a graph when analyzing situations like this. Trying to do the analysis of the comparative statics, how is the price going to change, how is the quantity going to change, in your head is a recipe for disaster. If you could do the analysis in your head, it really wouldn't have made sense for you to enroll in this class in the first place. Obviously, you should be in some advanced level economics if you can do all of these problems in your head. So, if we're going to be doing free trade with an import quota that binds, that must mean that we were having imports to start with, and the world price was down here. So, P world would be down here, and here is our free trade imports. And then a quota is imposed that binds, so that means we're going to have fewer imports because the quota is restricting them. So say the quotas are going to be right here. So the quota limits us to a smaller number of imports. And we're asked to show that consumer surplus decreased and producer surplus increased. Well, we can just label the increase in producer surplus on our graph and our decrease in consumer surplus, and then everybody's happy. So this area here, as we can see, the price is higher and the amount that the producer sells is more. So this shaded area is increase PS. So I'll call that the producer surplus bonus. And it represents a decrease in consumer surplus. There's actually a bigger decrease, right? All of this that I could shade in that's labeled quota is also a decrease in consumer surplus. So we can see just by looking at this black area that CS clearly decreased, PS clearly increased. And now that we've drawn this graph, we just have to explain what's going on here and what this black shaded area represents, and we can get full credit. So now that we've answered all the questions, hopefully that helped you in your studying. These are difficult conceptual questions, so they probably, when you worked through them, they probably took 30 minutes to do these three, maybe more. That's okay, because you get 30 minutes per blue book on the final, and you'd probably have fewer questions than I listed on this problem of the day, so it should take you, it's reasonable to think that these problems would take you more than 30 minutes. Alright, good luck on the final tomorrow.